Welcome to week 3 of MPAI 600 here at Georgetown University's Applied Intelligence program. Just the only announcement I have is you should be wrapping up or complete, depending on when you're watching this, your collection plan. And I look forward to reading those over the next week. And I'm gonna have to try. My goal is to get them back to you by next Sunday, so a week to have them all graded and sent back to you. So review of last week. Again, I talked about requirements, about the need for them to be tight and focused and controversial. I'm hoping that you've incorporated those thoughts into the collection plan, and then we talked about analytical traps, intelligence traps, analytical bias, and this will become relevant as we go to the rest of this course. Some of you might have been exposed to this if you've taken the psychology of intelligence analysis class, but I just wanted to hit the high points of these biases. And again, some key issues. Confirmation bias is the key one, where again we have our bias and we look for evidence to try and confirm it, and we dismiss evidence that tries to point us in another direction. We all are victims of this. We all do this. And this is not to say that no one has biases, but this is just to make sure you're aware of when you have your biases. Mirror imaging. Again, another bias that occurs, that we assume everyone has our own viewpoints. That what we think is rational, everyone is rational. We're seeing this a lot with North Korea. And one of your final questions will be about the North Korean nuclear program. And, we assume Kim Jong-un wants the same things we do, economic or lifting the sanctions and all those types of things. And we assume he would give up his nuclear weapons for them. That kind of ignores his mindset. That ignores his fact that he's a dictator and he wants to preserve his own family's legacy. We don't worry about that in our democratic country. He has a different viewpoint. He has to protect his small country from attack that could be destroyed quite easily and has been invaded in the past. We in the United States don't have to worry about that, or haven't really have to worry about that for the last 200 years. Yet when we go into these North Korean negotiations and we're telling North Korea to disarm, and we think he's going to disarm, and we have an idea that he's going to disarm, we're looking at it through our lens and through our history. And I think we're suffering from mirror imaging right now. And you're going to see this mirror imaging in some of the case studies, Yom Kippur War, the Iraq WMD case study, or failure to find Iraq WMD, as we go forward. And then the confessions, again, really highlighted a lot of these traps. And again, what I want you to do is, and I thought I was clear, but do it from here on in, is, we talk about the theory in class and apply the theory to the case study. And there's plenty of times where the confessions illustrates this. Again, classic confirmation bias. Maybe I shouldn't say classic confirmation bias. Maybe I should say criminal confirmation bias, where the detective, particularly Detective Ford, had a theory, and everything was set to the theory. These Norfolk naval sailors raped this and killed this young woman. And if the confession didn't line up, they got another confession, and then when someone had DNA evidence, that was dismissed, and then if they tried to fit that into a original confession, you saw it in the documentary, where again, that you had the first theory and everything was really welded behind that. You had vividness bias, which you'll see again time and time again in the course. But the confession, the playing of that audio tape of that confession was very, very vivid to the juries and in the courtrooms, regardless that confession was about as valid as a $3 bill. But the vividness, the way they talked and how that impacted, that was a bias used to convict these four folks wrongly. It also occurred, again, you had pictures of the victims in the court case And that prejudices the jury. A murdered person with his picture and her blood all over the place, that's going to make the jury angry at the defendant, even though that doesn't mean that the defendant actually committed the crime. So vividness bias also played a large role in this factor. And then you had clientelism. We're going to talk about this in later sections, but in the intelligence community, when they get too close, when the intelligence gets too close to the policymakers, and they try and fit the intelligence to make sure the policymaker is happy, that's called clientelism. And I think it occurred in this case as well, where the goal for everyone was to get the guy behind bars, convict the guy no matter what. Just get a guy in prison, because we don't want the community to think that there's a person out there that's a murderer that's just roaming out there. So everyone was victim of it. The detective wanted to get the conviction. The prosecutors wanted to get the conviction. Juries wanted to put somebody in jail. Prosecutors and judges were too close, and they couldn't provide adequate oversight of each other, or judges couldn't provide adequate oversight. So again, you see clientelism occur throughout the chain of command. And then lastly, I'll just talk about Georgetown values. I don't know if this matters to people, if they're Catholic, Jesuit, religious, or anything, but Georgetown does try and have an emphasis on social justice, about doing the right thing for the betterment of society. And it's one of the values they try and incorporate into some of these classes. Clearly, this was an injustice perpetrated against these four men. And if you've been following the news, those four men their convictions were just vacated last year in 2017. They just got final lawsuits were finally settled 3 weeks ago in December of 2018. So it took 20 years to get some sort of justice for these four members. And again, it's not, well, two things. One, if you're in these positions, and if you're in criminal justice or in large intelligence assessment, you might have power over people's lives. So I'd like to think that you're doing it from a sense of trying to do the right thing, as opposed to trying to just serve this not narrow clientelism. So that's what I'm, one thing I, try and impart on you. And the thing is, second thing is I just want to impart, and I mentioned this earlier, this wasn't one rogue cop. It's very easy to say that this was just one rogue cop and it caused all these problems, Detective Ford. But there was detectives, there was other detectives, there was prosecutors, there was juries, there was judges, there was appellate courts. There was the governor of Virginia who didn't vacate these sentences until just last year. So there was faults in many people who either fell for their own analytical traps or fell for their own clientelism and failed to do the right thing when it mattered. So I just want to kind of leave you with that as we wrap up week 2. So going on to week 3, previewing week 3. So 2 case studies. We're going to start talking about history. If you're in the intelligence business, you should have an appreciation of history. You should understand that history not repeats itself, at least rhymes. And the patterns that we're going to see in our case studies that we do this week, they're relevant to what's going on in North Korea now, what's going on with Russian interference in our election. The same pathologies are still there. So that's why I go back in history, not just to be a historian, but to look at those lessons learned from the past. And the 2 case studies, Pearl Harbor, Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, and the Yom Kippur War, which was the Arab attack against Israel in 1973. Both countries, both sophisticated intelligence services, kind of caught with their pants down. And the question is why? Where did the failures occur along the chain? And one thing to think about as you're going through the readings and you're going through the questions, Where were the failures? Where along the chain did the failure occur? Was it a failure in collection, inadequate collection? There was good collection, but there was a failure in analysis, how to process the information that was coming out? Was the intelligence right, but the policymaker, it wasn't communicated to the policymakers very well, or military leaders that can make decisions to stop the surprise? Or was it everything was successful and the policymakers just failed to act? Policymakers or military leaders fail to act with the information that they had on their hand. Or were there just underlying circumstances? Stuff happens. I don't know if you want to say that to your boss or to military commanders, but sometimes just there's bad luck and bad circumstance. So where along the line were the failures occur? Think about that, again, as you're doing the readings for this upcoming week and watching the documentary. So the reading, again, the Dahl Intelligence and Surprise Attack, excellent book. You're going to probably go through most of it by the end of this course. And you'll see the chapters on Pearl Harbor and Midway as well, which was an intelligence success. And it'll lead you to kind of compare and contrast what works and what doesn't. You'll have the Yom Kippur article by Avi Shalom, and then the Al Jazeera documentary. It's actually a 3-part documentary. I only assigned part 1. It'll give you enough background on the Yom Kippur War and also go into the intelligence failure as well related to the Yom Kippur War. So that's week 3 in a nutshell. Again, I'll have your collection papers back to you hopefully within a week. And if there's questions or issues, please let me know.